Hey everyone, I'm Evie, a longtime Splatoon player, and welcome to the 6th video on the history of Splatoon abilities. This one was voted on by you, pretty soundly getting the majority of the votes. Let's talk about Tenacity, an ability longtime Splatoon players may be fond of, but has fallen to the side in recent years. But before we get started, I actually wanted to let you know that you're the only person not subscribed to my channel. So you might want to fix that by hitting the subscribe button, as I have a playlist of more of these types of videos with more coming in the future. Well, let's get started. Tenacity is a headgear exclusive ability introduced in Splatoon. It fills the special gauge based on how fewer players are alive on your team compared to the enemy team. For example, if your team only has 2 players alive and the enemy team has all 4 players, Tenacity will activate. But if your team has 3 players alive and the enemy team also has 3 players alive, it won't activate. You have to have fewer teammates alive. Though the amount of points earned per second increases based on the player difference. On launch, you'd earn 1.8 points per second if you had 1 fewer teammates, 3.6 points per second for 2 fewer, and 5.4 points per second if you had 3 fewer teammates respectively. This does not stack with special charge up. It just gives you a flat rate for special points. Despite giving lackluster returns for such specific conditions, this ability was run quite a bit early in Splatoon 1. As Comeback didn't originally give you special charge up, and the special charge up ability was weaker, as it only gave you points based on how the turf was inked, instead of just general turf. But in version 2.0.0 on August 6, 2015, Tenacity got a funny nerf. The special gauge will no longer fill before the start of a match in the event of a disconnect. This is more of a bug fix than a nerf. Getting an extra 3 to 6 points before the match starts didn't really matter, especially if you were a teammate down before it even began. Well, yes, it's technically worse. This bug fix did nothing to change its usage, and it still remained somewhat common. But the next actual change was in version 2.6.0 on March 8, 2016, where the effectiveness of Tenacity increased by 20% on all 3 stages, increasing to 2.16, 4.32, and 6.48 points per special for a 1, 2, and 3 teammate difference respectively. This was quite a sizable buff, and long-ranged weapons like E-Liter 3K and Hydro Splatling started to use this more often, as they're the furthest from the action and die the least, so they're able to get the benefits more often. Weapons that survive a lot also may like this ability, such as 96 Galdeco or Cherry H3 Nozzle Nose, as despite being closer to the action, their kits give them a lot of sustain, so being able to get their specials faster can allow them to continue brawling. Though an interesting downside to Tenacity was the environment of Splatoon 1. Around the end of Splatoon 1, people were stacking tons of quick respawn and stealth jump, known as zombie comps, trying to throw themselves at the enemy team to overwhelm them with numbers. You may think that your teammates always dying would be a plus for this ability, but because quick respawn was essential to this type of strategy, they wouldn't be dead for long, so you wouldn't get the full benefits from Tenacity. Though, it still was used, as Last Ditch Effort and Opening Gambit weren't as good as they are now, and Comeback was really only used for weapons that fight and die a lot. That's how Tenacity was left in Splatoon 1. While not a prominent ability, you still saw it quite a bit. Didn't have a suffocating presence, but was still impactful in the games it took part in. But Tenacity was brought back for Splatoon 2. Tenacity was still seen a bit in early Splatoon 2, but its fall-off wasn't due to any direct changes. Tenacity didn't really have any competition. Opening Gambit and Last Ditch Effort were still bad, and Comeback was good, even after getting the nerf, giving it less abilities. It was still seen, though Comeback was really only for aggressive weapons, so it didn't compete with Tenacity. Well, if you look at all the weapons collectively, yes, you'd want to main a special charge up over Tenacity for most weapons. But it's still good for weapons that stayed back like Chargers and Splatlings, or weapons with high sustain like Baller and Ink Armor weapons. The one thing that was in favor of Tenacity was the quick respawn nerf. With quick respawn not activating on every death, your teammates will stay dead longer, therefore keeping Tenacity more active. In turn, the enemies will stay dead longer too, meaning it can also hurt not being active longer, but overall, respawn times being greater for everyone on average helps Tenacity more. But as Splatoon 2 went on, the value of spamming your special was more realized. People started investing more into it. This may sound good for Tenacity, but it really wasn't. While yes, building your special passively was good, weapons that wanted to spam Tentamissiles, Stingray, and Ink Armor wanted to do it actively, not passively. Always having a main a special charge would always help you build your special, compared to meeting a condition where if your team plays well, you wouldn't activate it much. The falloff of Tenacity wasn't its fault, but more so the changing environment of Splatoon 2. When Last Ditch Effort got buffed, everyone started using it, because having more ink to paint and keeping up the pressure gets your special more often. Around this time, teams were very stally, and getting one kill almost won an entire team fight for you, so you had very few people dying. Along with the three main users of Tenacity, E-Leader 4K, Hydra Splatling, and Jet Squelcher started to want other abilities. E-Leader wanted to stack main power up, to have range slightly increased and paint more. Hydra Splatling wanted to stack as much run speed as possible, and if it wanted a main exclusive ability, it'd usually use Object Shredder, while Jet Squelcher wanted Last Ditch Effort and Special Charge Up to put out as many Tentamissiles and Stingrays as possible. Zombie comps weren't as good as they were in Splatoon 1, but stacking tons of quick respawn and throwing yourself at the enemy with weapons like dualies and blasters, Tenacity wouldn't be the worst idea, as you'd be a beacon for those teammates and benefit passively from the special charge gain. But with no balance changes in the entirety of Splatoon 2, it wasn't able to keep up with the ever-evolving metagame, and was forgotten. But fortunately for it, it returned in Splatoon 3. Despite Splatoon 3 introducing a lot of new things, it kept a lot of old stuff too, and the meta was very similar to the end of Splatoon 2. I would also argue that Tenacity's a little bit worse, since the average points per special is higher in this game than in Splatoon 2, so the rates aren't going to be as good as they were previously, though there were two weapons that used Tenacity in early Splatoon 3. E-Leader was back and even better at the beginning of Splatoon 3. With the lack of ink armor and Stingray, along with how the maps were designed, E-Leader got a lot of usage. Despite usually going with Last Ditch Effort, Tenacity was a very viable option, as it was most often alive, and getting special faster helped it maintain control. The second weapon may be surprising, Reflex 450. The only reason Reflex used Tenacity is that a third main a special charge up wouldn't be as effective. At the time, Tentamissiles were able to be fired right after using them, so Reflex was picked just to spam them, and was usually far away from the team, not dying, being extremely passive. Because Reflex didn't get its fighting buffs until much later, and in 2.0, Tentamissiles got nerfed, reducing the amount you get, you never really see Tenacity on Reflex ever again. But in version 5.0.0 on August 31st, 2023, Tenacity got buffed after 7.5 years, increasing the speed at which the special gauge fills when the conditions are met. Very obtuse wording. Like it's better now, but it doesn't specify by how much. This part drove me crazy. While doing research for these videos, I use a mix of Inkopedia, testing, and asking data miners on the more obscure stuff. But the numbers presented on Inkopedia seemed too high, so this led to my search for the true numbers, and I learned a lot more than I was ever expecting. I found out the numbers currently used was an assumption that the 5.0.0 buff doubled the effectiveness, but there was no source, so I decided to ask around. However, points per special through Tenacity don't have an associated parameter, and instead calls from a function to activate it, which hasn't been reverse engineered yet to my understanding. How Inkopedia used to track the effectiveness of Tenacity was how many seconds it took to charge your special, which was measured with a timer, extremely inaccurate, until around March of 2016, where they converted that time to points per second. It wasn't until May of 2019 where we got the exact points for Tenacity, and working backwards, we were able to get the numbers for Splatoon 1 before 2.6.0. But after doing some testing, the numbers seemed way too high, and calculating it myself, I got similar numbers to someone who calculated it around September of 2023. I remember hearing at the time Tenacity got buffed 50% for 1 down, 25% for 2 down, and 12.5% for 3 down. But after hours of searching, I couldn't find that post. But plugging those numbers in, it looks like it's the most probable option, as the numbers are very similar to the estimates, and it makes sense to increase the effectiveness by a certain amount, instead of random percentages. One thing I learned is Tenacity starts before the UI is even fully loaded in, very similar to that bug in Splatoon 1 we went over earlier. It's almost been 2 years since the game's been out, and it hasn't been patched, so I assume it's just a bug and no one's noticed it yet. But after all that, here are the updated numbers you want to hear. 1 player down is 3.24 points per second, 2 players down is 5.4 points per second, and 3 players down is 7.29 points per second using my 50-25-12.5 theory, which is the most likely, though not confirmed at the time, correct. After that long detour, what does this actually mean for the ability? Did it see a lot more use? Well, it didn't, but that buff was at the same time Last Ditch ever got nerfed, so it closed the gap between the two, giving you more of a reason to run it if you so choose. But right now, in the current day, what weapons like Tenacity? Most backlines could make the argument for it, especially after the removal of main power-up. Weapons that used it now have more gear space for other abilities, E-Leader 4K, Hydra Splatling, Jet Squelcher, and new to this list, Tri-Stringer and Snipe Rider. Tenacity has always seen some use. Even after a full game of no balance changes and getting a buff in Splatoon 3, it still seems that it will show up from time to time, even if it never becomes front and center. I have a few things before we wrap up. The ability icon hasn't changed much between the 3 games, keeping the same idea of more squids against yourself. Though, it doesn't look like there is a beta icon for it, as this image from GDQ 2018 shows beta icons for the abilities, while Tenacity has a timer that doesn't really match what the ability does. Maybe it was replaced with something else during development, or worked very differently. Who knows? In Splatoon 3, to add Tenacity to a piece of headgear, it costs 15 chunks, a special charge up, special saver, and special power up. I want to say thank you for watching. The research part of this video was a lot different than I expected, though I still enjoyed it in the end. The poll for the next ability to be covered in the series goes up now, so vote on which one you want to see next. I hope to get a video for the winner of the poll out in July or August. I want to say that I'm now a YouTube partner, and I have a couple of memberships set up. I want to be straightforward and say that there will be no exclusive content behind memberships. It's more so of a tip jar if you want to support me, as currently, I do not make money from any of the ads on my videos. I'll be posting thumbnails of my next videos a week early there, but no exclusive videos or streams. I want to say thank you for supporting me. See you next time.